agreed better system.
Chair.
I call Denise Roche.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's my pleasure to take this first call for the Greens on the Gambling Amendment Bill number 3. Like the previous speaker, I did also have to go back and review what had happened at Select Committee and in the second readings, because it has been quite a long period of time since we were here in the House debating these issues, and a long period of time actually since we heard the submissions during the Select Committee. So I'm not usually a member of the Government Administration Committee, but I stepped in because I'm the gambling spokesperson for the Greens, and I want to acknowledge the Chair and the other members of the Government Administration Committee for the excellent way that we examined all the evidence before us and made our report. Unfortunately, sir, I don't agree with a lot of things that are still in the bill, and it's for this reason that I have put forward one supplementary order paper that actually covers several issues. So we spend an enormous amount of money on gambling in this country. There's 1,300 Class 4 gambling venues across the country, and it's acknowledged that these need to be regulated, and I'm pleased to see the Minister in charge of that regulation and the Chair, because I do have some questions for him. The area where they need to be regulated is around where there is the potential for the funds that are generated from gambling, around how those funds are gathered, where those funds come from, and where those funds go to. So there's parts of this bill, particularly in the first part, which we agree with. Things like transparency, dealing with conflicts of interest, very sensible and reasonable adjustments to the legislation. But where we don't agree is around the issue of the controls and mechanisms that should be in place in the regulation to control problem gambling and to control the spread of or the ease of access to the gambling machines if there is a problem in the community. And it's also about the fact that we have to acknowledge that Class 4 gambling, that electronic gambling machines do create problem gamblers. And there's international evidence that actually supports the fact that the machines themselves are designed to ensure that there is a percentage of gamblers who gamble regularly, that they will become problem gamblers. And it's here, sir, that I believe our regulation should be focused. It should be focused on minimising harm. And I think it's the duty of a responsible government to ensure that our laws are in place to protect our citizens. That's surely what we all want across the House, and I'm sure I would get cross-party support on that statement. It's how we go about it, and fundamentally we disagree with some of the provisions in this bill, in Part 1, that will liberalise access to gambling, and subsequently will incentivise venue owners particularly to not control problem gambling or monitor it the way they are required to under the Gambling Act. So since 2003, I think it is, since the 2003 when the Gambling Act, the first Gambling Act was modified or modernised, there has been a strong opposition to having commission-based payments for venue operators. And this, I'm sure, will be outlined time and time again tonight. The reason for it, and it's the reason that we heard time and again put forward by submitters, the reason to not have commission-based payments to venues is simply because it does incentivise the venue operator to not do the correct host responsibility and to promote problem gambling. Now, we have a situation where 40% of the funds that are generated for community purpose from Class 4 gambling, 40% of that comes from people who have problem gambling problems. They have limited control over their gambling behaviour. And we also know at where those 1,300 venues are placed, that, Mr Chair,
Call
Mr
Denise
Chair,
Rush.
thank you, that these target poorer communities because essentially they sell hopes and dreams in a very cynical way that lures people in the mistaken belief that they will be able to get rich, get out of their financial problems, and basically make a life. And they are false dreams, sir. They're definitely false dreams because it is a cynical ploy by the industry to ensure that they entrap people with limited control over their gambling. It creates that sort of gambling behaviour. So we've got a few supplementary order papers in part one. Well, they cover a few things. One is around removing the ability for venues to be paid in a commission-based. The other area is around removing what I think the officials have described as an incentive to venue holders with licences to extend those licences for 3 years. The reason we oppose that, sir, is because we have seen that there's very limited good behaviour in the pokie sector, much at all. The sting that other people have referred to by the Department of Labour, where their compliance team in December last year visited pokie gambling venues across the country, and only one complied with good host responsibility behaviour. That seems to imply that there are very few venues that are currently operating in a way that actually says that they should be rewarded for good behaviour. And what I would like to see is more compliance and evidence of compliance well before we regulate to offer a 3-year licence with few controls or regulations or even oversight. The other area, sir, is around harm minimisation, which is completely missing. And this was one of the issues that came up time and time again in the submissions that we put forward. And some of it was really heartbreaking. What we would like to do in order for us to support the bill would be to amend the bill to ensure that there are effective harm minimisation practices in the regulation, which would then have to happen in venues, Class 4 venues across the country. And that sort of harm minimisation suggestions that I have in my SOP is around things like player tracking, real-time player tracking, and pre-commitment cards. This hands the control over to the gambler with a pre-commitment card. They can determine before they start gambling how much they're going to spend, how much time they're going to spend, and then once their card has expired, they're finished. This, in effect, limits, it's a very effective limit on the amount of gambling that that someone who wants to have a flutter can basically just go ahead and have a flutter and it won't be a problem. But for those who are starting to emerge with problem gambling behaviours, it is a way for them to regulate, well, self-monitor their own gambling behaviours there. We've also suggested that there be player tracking, and this is something that that we could be doing as the technology improves. And I think there was some discussion, and there has been in previous bills as well, around facial technology. And then if you use facial technology, then you can actually, you can actually ban people from playing at the machines and losing money. And I guess we could be going down that track, but actually we need to be looking at prevention rather than before the problem happens, rather than restrictions on gamblers who already have the problem gambling behaviours in place. Sir, we were pleased to be part of the select committee, I was pleased to be part of the select committee to hear the submissions that we heard on that. There was some very, very good and compelling evidence from places like the Auckland City Council, for example, who, while they supported the bill in many aspects, certainly around the distribution of funds, increasing that to 40% from where it's been at 37 point something, and the issues around conflict of interest and the issues around greater transparency, well, they supported all that.
I call